Hey guys, it's Darwin, and today I'm talking about resupply strategies during a thru hike and what food I typically carry. Yep, I braved the cold and the snow. I got some snowshoes and I'm back out here on the trail. So apparently I like you guys a little bit. It is freezing out here and there's tons of snow. But here I am, so let's jump into the video. So over the years, I've made a handful of videos about the types of food that I carry when I'm out on the trail, and I've loosely talked about how I resupply, but I feel like there's a lot of people out there that might be planning their first thru hike or long section hike that still really have no idea on how to resupply, how they should resupply, and what types of food that they're going to be resupplying on while they're doing a long hike. So first, let's talk about general resupplying. Now, if you're gonna go out and do a weekend backpacking trip or maybe a week-long section hike, odds are you're gonna be carrying all your food from the beginning all the way through the entire hike. So you're not really gonna need to stop in a town and get extra food. But if you're doing something like a thru hike or a couple week-long section hike where you're gonna be out there for an extended period of time, you're gonna have to jump into town and resupply on food and other gear. And odds are you're not gonna be able to carry all of your food and all of your gear for 4 to 6 months unless you have like a really strong Sherpa or a donkey or something. So there's a handful of different options on how to do it while you're out there. Whether it's sending yourself a box to a post office, resupplying at a local grocery store or convenience store, or even utilizing a service like 0-day resupply. It's really all gonna depend on 3 things: what trail you're hiking, how much you're willing to carry, and what type of food you're willing to eat. So first, let's talk about what trail that you're gonna be hiking. Now, a lot of your resupply strategy during a thru hike is going to largely depend on what trail you're choosing to do. Most trails like the AT, the PCT, or the Arizona Trail are going to be routed in a way that they come to a town or some sort of a community or civilization about every 4 to 5 days, depending on how fast you can hike. And in those towns, you're going to find grocery stores, convenience stores, Dollar Generals, gas stations, and post offices. So you have kind of a big variety of ways to resupply versus doing something like the Grand Enchantment Trail or the Hayduke Trail, where they're a little less developed, a little more out there in the middle of nowhere. When you get to a small town or community, it might just have a gas station and a post office, so your resupply options are limited. Now, there's some trails that I've done where I've actually done both. I've mainly resupplied in towns, but I've also sent myself boxes in certain places where I knew that I wouldn't have good options to get food. A good example is when I did the PCT in 2018, about 95% of the time I resupplied in towns, at grocery stores, at convenience stores, at little resupply stops. But there were places like White's Pass and Stehekin where I sent myself a box because I knew that it was really limited resupply and I wouldn't be able to find that much food, and what I could find was going to be quite expensive. And that comes down to doing your research before you get out there and knowing what to expect when you get to each town and each stop. So what I typically do before I go out and do a thru hike is, number one, I get on Google and I'll type in Great Divide Trail resupply options. Chances are the Trail Association or another hiker that's hiked in the past has made a list of different spots and stops that you can do while you're on the trail. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is grab my guide or my app and start looking at those towns and those spots to see what services are there. One of the great things about something like Guthook is I can get on there, I can zoom into a town, I can see that there's a grocery store, I can see that there's a post office, and then I can read comments from other hikers in the past that have said, you know, there's bad resupply here, there's good resupply here, send yourself a box here. And that way I know that I can either depend on there being food or I need to send myself a box. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is look at how much I'm willing to carry. So just like getting on the app or the guide and looking at what is going to be in the town, in the stop that you're going to, I also start looking at the mileage between both of those stops. Now, I mainly do that when I'm out on the trail because doing it before is kind of hard because you never really know what's going to happen on the trail. Some days you might do less miles. Some days you might do more miles. Things can happen that hold up your hike. You can go off onto little side things on the trail and see that'll take up more time. But regardless, I look at that mileage. And not only do I look at the mileage, I look at the terrain, I look at the weather, and I make a guesstimation on how much food that I'm gonna need to carry between those two spots. If I know that I have 60 miles between two towns and I'm gonna be able to hike at least 20 miles a day, I'm only gonna need to carry 3 days of food. So it comes down to knowing your ability, understanding how much mileage that you have, what your hunger is, and what lies ahead of you. There's really no science to figuring out your resupply because things constantly change while you're out on the trail. Now, all of that is a big reason why I personally don't, and a lot of other hikers don't, solely do resupply boxes. It's really hard to know and figure out what you're gonna wanna eat, where you're gonna be, and what's gonna happen when you're sitting at home packing those boxes up. Now, what's a good reason a hiker would send themselves all resupply boxes to a post office? Well, that's all gonna come down to what type of food you're willing to eat. Or I guess I should say, what type of food that you can eat. A lot of the resupply options that you're gonna find out on long distance trails are gonna have very basic food, which is why things like ramen noodles, Knorr rice sides, instant mashed potatoes, Snicker bars, Cliff bars have become a staple for thru hiker diets. I don't wanna eat that stuff while I'm out there. It's not because I like it, but it's because I have limited options and because it's cheap. If I'm out there from 4 to 6 months, it's a lot cheaper on my wallet. If I'm trying to stretch my budget for an entire hike, I got to think about that when I'm resupplying and sometimes not buy the best, nicest, most expensive food and go with some of the cheaper stuff that's higher calorie. Now, if you have certain diet restrictions where you eat more uncommon food, so say you're a vegan or you're gluten-free or you're diabetic, that's when you might want to consider sending yourself all boxes on the trail. Now, doing all mail drop boxes on a thru hike takes a lot more time, a lot more organization, research to put all those together. And I'm not going to go over all that in today's video, but if you want to find out more information on that, if you think that's going to be an option for you and you have a specific diet, my buddy Frozen over at Outdoor Adventures recently made a video all on how to send yourself boxes on the trail. So I'll leave the link down below for that. So as I'm quickly approaching my 2020 hiking season, I've been thinking a lot about and doing a lot of research on how I'm going to resupply, where I'm going to resupply, and what I'm going to eat on the AT, on the GDT, and the Colorado Trail. Now, I personally don't have any diet restrictions, and I typically eat just about anything when I'm out on a thru hike. But over the last handful of years, I've really been trying to step my nutrition game up and get less refined sugars, less carbs, more fats, and more protein. So for my hikes this year, I'm going to be doing kind of a blend of sending myself some boxes in certain places, but mainly resupplying while I'm out on the trail. And now that I've went back to a stove and I'm cooking again, I've started to reintroduce some of those meals that I used to eat in the past, like Knorr rice sides, like mashed potatoes, but adding things to them like certain oils and fats to kind of boost the nutrition a little bit while I'm out there. Now, before I start talking about what type of food that I eat, what I resupply on, and what I use on the trail, let me remind everyone that we are all different. We all have different diets. We all know our bodies differently. We all work in a different way. Yes, some of the food that I eat out on the trail is not the best. Some of it has higher sugar. Some of it's processed, and a lot of it has a lot of packaging. But after hiking over 7,000 miles in 5 years, I know what works for me. I know what gives me fuel. I know what I can find when I'm out on the trail. Just because I eat it does not mean that it is for everybody and it's what everybody should eat on a hike. It's just what works for me. It's not like I want to eat bad food. It's not like I want to have a lot of trash and packaging. But sometimes you can't just stroll down the street to your local Whole Foods and buy some really good, high nutritious, low packaging food. sometimes you just have to deal with what you're given and what you can use while you're out on the trail. And that's what I've learned over the years. So I use what I can use, what I know that I can carry, and what I know works for me and gives me fuel on the trail. So today I've basically put together what I'm going to be starting the AT with in March. Now, in that first stretch, I'm going to be going from Springer to Hiawassee, Georgia, and that's about 70 miles. Well, I know that I can do about 20 miles a day in that section because of my research, because I've hiked it before. So I'm going to be carrying 4 days of food, but you'll notice that I don't have a full 4 days of food. The first day I don't have a breakfast, the last day I don't have a dinner, and I'll go over that a little bit more here in a minute, but let's open it up and I'll show you guys what I typically carry on a full resupply. All right, so first off, you will probably notice starting here with day 1 that I separate all of my stuff into individual gallon bags. Now the reason I do that is because I tend to want to eat more than I should actually be eating. So I started doing that back on the AT in 15 just to make sure that I didn't eat all my food in one day. It's just easier for me. All right, so if we dive into day 1 here, you'll notice right off the bat there's no breakfast. And that's because if I am starting the trail or if I am leaving a resupply, odds are I already had breakfast, so I'm not going to need to carry that on the first day. Starting up at the top here, I have a Knorr rice side, and that's the fancy select one, with a tuna packet that has some good olive oil in there, so high calorie, and then some extra fat butter to add to that for calories and just for extra good fat. And then moving down, I usually carry about 4 to 5 bars per day, and I try to get a bar that has at least 200 calories. Moving over to day 2, basically the same thing for dinner, except for I swapped it out to a mashed potato just to kind of get a little bit of variety. And again, I have some of that butter for extra fat and some tuna in olive oil for higher calories. Again, I'm going to have about 4 to 5 bars to snack on throughout the day. And then for breakfast that morning, I typically have something like a Bobo's oat bar or some sort of oat bar and a packet of coffee. Day 3 is basically going to be a carbon copy of day 2. So Knorr rice side, salmon and butter, 4 to 5 bars, and again a Bobo's oat bar and coffee. And then moving over to the last day, you'll notice that my day 4 is pretty small, and that's because I'm going to be going into a town. So all I have is breakfast, again a oat bar and coffee, and then 4 to 5 bars to eat throughout the day as I'm on my way into town. Now I won't need dinner because odds are I'll be eating that night whenever I get into a town, or I'll have food from my resupply box to eat for dinner that first night out on the trail. Now, last but not least, we have basically what I eat every day for lunch. So I don't do a lot of lunch, but what I do eat are usually mixed nuts, so macadamias, cashews, and almonds. And then I usually have some sort of crunchy, salty chip, in this case, Cheetos jalapeno. Not exactly the best food, but I like to get a little bit of salt and like to have something to crunch on. And then again, for breakfast every day, I have a little bit of trail butter with my oat bar, and 2 of those will typically last me about 4 days. Now, I don't always use trail butter, but I try to get some sort of nut butter, whether it's peanut butter, almond butter, basically whatever I can find at the store. And then the last thing that I have is a little packet of extra drink mixes. So I do carry extra coffee in case I run out or I can't find it in my next resupply, some green drinks, and some electrolytes and flavorings for my water. And that's about it. Pretty basic. Like I said, that is for 4 days. And in this case, that's going to be for 70 miles. So as you can see, I try to look for high calorie, low weight, high fat, high protein, and somewhat cheap food. I tend to blend some of that crappy food that I can find while I'm out on the trail, some of the easy stuff that's going to be available to me, and I try to blend that with some better stuff. What I'll end up probably doing is on the AT, on the GDT, and on the CT is probably about 90% of the time I'm going to be resupplying in towns at convenience stores and grocery stores, but I will be sending myself some supplementary boxes with some of those nut butters, some of those oils, some of the coffee that I like to drink while I'm out on trail, and just try to put those things together. And then obviously there'll be some towns and some certain stops that I'll send myself a full box because I know that it's low options. So again, there's no exact science to it. It really comes down to doing your research and understanding yourself, seeing what type of food that you need to eat and how much of that food that you need to carry between the stops. Figure out what trail you're going to be hiking, what you're willing to carry, and what type of food that you're willing to eat while you're out there. Do your research, plan a little bit ahead, and aside from that, resupplying is pretty easy. Are you a through hiker or a section hiker? What do you typically do when you're out on the trail? Do you resupply in towns or do you send yourself boxes? Leave me something down below and let me know your thoughts. If you found any value in this video, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. As always, guys, thanks for watching. Now I'm going to strap these bad boys on and get out of here.